Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and I am thrilled to introduce my next guest, a visual artist, researcher, and archivist. His practice combines photography, text, video, and installation to craft an archive that intertwines mythological, historical, and societal dimensions. His work has been showcased internationally, including exhibitions at Schoenberg Center of Research in Black Culture and the Langston Hughes Library. Please welcome Joseph Cochran II. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be talking with you.
100%. I mean, it's, we were chatting a little bit before we got into this, and the actual real thing, sort of the pre, how I've been looking at the interviews like you go into a restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like we're having sort of the talk before we get our water and then before we actually. So the way I'm going to break this down is I got questions, and they're broken out in like 3 different sections, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, appetizer sort of questions, the main course, and then desserts and maybe like post drinks and things of that nature. So that's the way I look at it.
Got the tipsy drinks at the end. I like I like that.
the flaming moes, if you will.
Uh-huh.
A little Simpsons reference there. So again, thank you for coming on, and I want to start off with sort of the in the beginning question. What were some of those like early experiences, early like influences that kind of touched on maybe your perspective and how you approach the creative work that you're doing today, whether it's your creative sensibilities or just things that stuck out creatively for you think back to being a young person?
For sure. Well, I will begin with the positive. I was raised. So I'm from East Harlem, originally, also known as Spanish Harlem or El Barrio to some. And, I was raised as a single child, but I have siblings. But I was raised as a single child in my early formative years by my grandmother. And my grandmother, she was it's been about 20 years now. I've been trying to find the words to describe her. But she was, for lack of a better phrase, an interesting person who, for all of her faults, had many positives. And she was adamant from as early as I can remember that I was like, I hate using this word, but destined to like do something with myself, which I think is really just like that old adage of like the Black woman making sure that like their child knows that they have to be whoever they want to be in this world and helping them self-actualize, right? So very early on, my grandmother, I had to get home from school, and my grandmother would just like give me second school. Like anything that I wanted to know, anything that I asked about, she would do her best to answer. We would do funny pop culture things like watch Jeopardy every night and shit like that, But most importantly, and this is one of my fondest memories, she had this huge bookshelf just full of Britannicas, full of all these history books, all kinds of like tomes, right? And I would just like read, like shuffle through these things like they were fiction. And I would just ask her like, wow, this, for example, this French Revolution thing sounds crazy. Like, what movie is this or whatever? And then she would tell me, no, this is history. And then explain to me what it means and things like that.
Yeah.
Also, and I guess this speaks to my like visual development, she was really, really into film. And she would take me to movies. She would take me to see movies all the time. And, not just like pop culture films, which I'm a big, big fan of, but like, early, like 90s Miyazaki films and cute, like screenings of Stanley Kubrick films and stuff like that. So, I remember seeing like Dr. Strangelove when I was like 7 years old, not understanding anything in the film, but loving it, like my eyes just peeled to the screen. And I think from very early on, I told myself, oh man, I'm going to grow up one day and like be a filmmaker. I'm going to like make films. I'm going to make movies, Yeah. I'm going to make like the Space Odyssey, 2001 A Space Odyssey one day, whatever. And so that's one thing. Also my community, I was heavily from playing baseball to just being outside in general, I was always just observing my environment and, overhearing or directly hearing stories from people. And that kind of created a certain how should I say, a certain sensibility when it comes to storytelling that I think I still have today, which is more or less stream of consciousness. The way that I weave photo narratives is more or less like stream of consciousness and, more dependent on the feel of the information being posited to someone than it is even in some cases the empirical, even in some cases the anthropological, if you will, so that's the positives, I would say. The negatives is my grandmother, she was a very sick woman when even before I was born. She was very sick, mentally sick. She had a breakdown when I was about 9 years old. Full mental breakdown. She's been schizophrenic. She was schizophrenic her entire life, like most of her life. And unfortunately, when she had her breakdown, I was also there, and our neighbors called the police, who then basically took me away and put me into the foster care system. And from there on, I was 9 years old when I went in. I spent about a year to almost 2 years in group homes before I was placed with a family, a young family in Brownsville, Brooklyn, who would later adopt me when I was 17 years old. And all through my adolescence, I had just intense emotional problems, intense problems with violence. I was what you would define as an at-risk youth, and also I had these temporal tendencies, if you will, where I would run away, I would disappear, sometimes for weeks. I would sometimes sleeping on a friend's couch would be more preferable to me sleeping at home. And it wasn't really because of any abuse or things said to me, even though those things were going on. It was more so I had this, because of what happened at the age of 9, I had this real psychological need for freedom. To just because what people don't understand about being in the foster care system is that when you're in the system, it's not the same as being in jail, but it's relative to being in jail. You can't leave the state. You can't you have no self-determination, not only because you're a child, but because you are more or less the responsibility of the state. Which I did not understand early on in my life. But, as I aged and learned more of the system, I realized that responsibility of the state basically means the state owns you, and that kind of stuff is not kosher for me. So plowing ahead, after I was in the system, I spent about 3 or 4 years just in self-destruction, just from crime to rampant drug use to being tourists with multiple people that I was dating, so on and so forth. I was really harming myself and my mind. And I got the opportunity to leave New York City when I was about 21 years old. And this is after a near-death experience that is documented in the New York Times. It's all around. Me and some friends, we almost died in a home invasion. And again, all these things that happened up to this point, and I was very burnt out. I was very just emotionally exhausted, and on some level physically exhausted. And I got the opportunity to leave. I moved to South New Jersey for a bit, where I worked in casinos and lived on a marina, which was I never experienced anything like this in my life. Then moved to Philly for a little bit, and and during this time, I had began to pick up the camera.
Mm.
You know, I like from my youth up until this moment, I had been keeping a journal. I've been writing poetry, all kinds of stuff. You know, I think when the home invasion happened, I had written about 300 to 350 poems that I had in a book that was all lost during this home invasion. And I was starting to rebuild that archive while I was in New Jersey based on new experiences. But I was talking to a friend and I was having issues remembering the things that I was writing about. Yeah. And my friend, who at the time was a photographer, he said, hey, you know, I got this student camera, like this Pentax K1000. Why don't you just take it and like see what you do with it? And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this shit, but whatever. I took it home and it just sat on my nightstand for like 6 months until one day, coming out of work one day after working a graveyard shift at this damn casino, I'm like, all right, fuck it. You know, I'm not sleepy. I'll take it out, make some pictures. You know, I shot my first like 2 rolls, got them developed, was on Skype. I mean, if anyone remembers Skype, I was on Skype with my friend. And I show him the images, and he's like, well, you know, like 2/3 of these to me are good. I think you should just stop what you're doing and like make photos. And I was like, well, fuck you. Don't gaslight me. I'm not doing this, you know. But I say all that, and I'm a very stubborn person. I say all that, and then like was still just making the pictures. Yeah. And eventually I came up to him like, hey, you know, here's like 300 pictures. What do you think of these? You know, and he's like, all right, yeah, you know, I got this opportunity for you. You know, I just designed this school in China. You should, you know, I got a lot of cachet in China. You know, I mean, with this developer, you know, I can get you a job here. So why don't you just move to China and just like work 20 something hours a week and make pictures? And I was just like, no, like I didn't know shit about China past Tiananmen Square, you know? And I'm like, hell no. Like, you crazy? Like, I'm American, I'm Black, this and the third. But then a lot of real life shit happened, you know? My grandmother, who I adored very much, she passed away, you know, which ended 50 something years of pain for her, which I was happy about. You know, and then my cousin, and this is the one that really killed me. My cousin Antoine, peace be upon him, he passed away. And he was only 33 years old when he passed away. And I couldn't get it out of, I mean, I had seen many of my friends had passed away. I've seen people die, you know, all these things. Death has been ever present in my life, metaphorically and literally, but I couldn't get it out of my head, this man dying, because for all of his good qualities, for all the things that he was about, he died when he passed away and no one spoke about his death. There was no real remembrance of his death. You know, it was almost as if he never existed. And maybe this is selfish of me, but I was determined to be remembered. I was determined to make sure that my history, my personal history, would be indexed. You know, to use like biblical terms, I mean, like, what is a gospel? It's just really like a written account of someone who has already existed. Yeah. And I saw the power of that kind of narrative in photography very early on. And yeah, like those experiences all together, I was like, well, this is, you know, I've lived so many lives already that I did not get to document what is the next, like, if I'm lucky, 50 years going to bring, you know? And yeah, I don't know if that completely answers your question, but
no. One, thank you for really opening up and sharing there. And yeah, I think it not only answers sort of that introductory question, but it answers like 3 other ones. So shout out to you. I like when people are overachieving. It's just like, all right, you're making my job easy. But also let me give you a chance to kind of like catch your breath there. I think, you know, it's important to really be able to share and document things that are happening in a certain period. That's really some of the considerations I make when I'm doing this. You're in a place, you see attention happening to a place, you see people coming and going, whether it's through sort of the mortal coil or through locality, just like leaving a place. You want to be able to capture what was this place like,
Right.
and via the stories of the people that are living it, not in this sort of editorialized sort of way that is like, this is the narrative that I want to do. I try to be as neutral as possible. It's like, what's real?
Yeah.
And I think it's something about doing that for a place, but something about doing that for ourselves and really being able to document it. So in this sort of question, how would you describe your work in sort of this journal, not journalism approach, but sort of maybe the journaling concept of really being able to document sort of your story as it's happening played a role into you pursuing the work that you're pursuing currently?
I would describe my work as the exploration or analysis of advanced industrial societies, their systems, and how we fit in them. Yeah. And what that means is that specifically in the context of my experience, I try to look at the pernicious effects of systemic injustices, and show how systems cause how some systems cause instability, which in effect cause change. And to achieve this, I do this through a mixture of what you call like journaling, photographic journaling. Yeah. I use documentary photography techniques and abstract imaging, and along with the text and video components and things like that, so I think that's the best summation of the work. If I had to, if it was just me and you shooting the shit at a bar, I would just say, I like to take pictures. It's before I was doing it, I was cursing people out and punching people in the streets. I no longer do that.
Thank you. I like it in both ways. And it's funny, like when you have to start thinking through things, and with the number of interviews I've done, I ask artists now, I'm like, yo, can you tell me what you do without giving me the artist statement? I have to do it that way. And even when I'm describing this, I was, telling you a little bit earlier about, some of the ways folks ask you to do it because they want you to be a brand that fits into certain buckets. I'm like, look, I talk to people who are interesting and I get them to like answer my goofy questions. That's really what it is. And I think make myself seem more interesting. Right. I can like reference you in conversation.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, that's it, right? Like, it, like making this work, because I mean, like imaging. I mean, I always I always have this like Jay-Z line in my head where he says, and I'm paraphrasing here maybe, but he says, y'all record, I recall, because I really been there before, you know, and I didn't realize how important that was until I had started living in Brussels, Belgium. And I was at my friend's school, the École Recherche Graphique, or ERG, which is a French art school in Brussels. I was in the atelier. It was like me, him, and his anthropology teacher just hanging out. And we had been having conversation for a while or whatever. And she's like, yo, like, show me your archive. Like, I want to see the work. Yeah. Show it to her. She was like, man, like, I showed all this shit. At the end of it, I'm like, yeah, I don't really know what the fuck I'm doing here, but I'm doing something, I think. Yeah. And and she's like, listen, you are cartographing new ways of seeing for your people. And she was like, I don't mean Black people. She's like, I mean your people, whoever your people are, and that showed me that, like, man, when, especially in imaging, in photography, when you're building your archive, which is the photographer's language, you are building a text that not only speaks to the time that you existed, but speaks to the challenges that the society that you were in faced. Whether it be like, I don't know, Eggleston's vision of the South, or Gordon Parks' vision of Chicago. From the mundane to the explicit, you are seeing something that 50 years from now may not even look the same. And there is a certain power in that, and a certain power in that in of itself.
Thank you. Wow. I was taking a quick note because I have a rapid fire question I'm adding. That's the thing I like to do. I like to add as I'm over here cramming. So give me the sort of like the driver. If there were, three words, and I'm taking almost like definitely lifting from one of the things I read, sort of the archive intertwining mythological, historical, and societal dimensions. What would you say like those drivers would be? If it was like, what would you say that sort of main driver is to push forward in that? Because I think I'm getting it, but for those in the back who came late to the class,
the main driver is fear of erasure. It's the fear of being erased. And, I, much like yourself, we are products of not only the era of mass incarceration, but the era of the war on drugs. We are truly the first generation of Black Americans to in my opinion, to really experience, if there were any fruits to be had, the fruits of the 1968 Civil Rights Bill, and before that flashpoint and after that flashpoint, how many lives erased? How many generations destroyed? How many histories silenced? We're still finding out about heroes of the Civil Rights era. Like today, we're still finding out about them. Like heroes of the Reconstruction era, of the Jim Crow era. We're still finding out about them today because they have been erased. Yeah. And that's the societal dimension, I think. Photographically, the medium itself is 150 years old. And in that time, there have maybe been less, if I had to make a throwing shit to the wall estimate here, probably less than 200 notable Black and brown photographers in this country. Notable ones, ones that have major museum acquisitions, major institutional backing, are talked about in the canon of photography itself, so on and so forth. And I would also posit that probably a good chunk of them, besides like people like Roy DeCarava or Jane Vander Zee or something, come after the year 1945. So like you condense that to maybe like 80 years of like Black excellence in photography. Maybe even less. So because Gordon Parks is kind of like the flashpoint for the, and I look at it like, all right, Alan Sekula, the photographer Alan Sekula, he has a very good manuscript called "The Body in the Archive," and it talks about how photography was used to create social stratas for people to exist within. Like the mugshot is a photographic creation, and it was created with this idea that if you index something enough, you can then make determinants of behavior. So, the mugshot went as far as like, all right, there's a certain ear that a criminal has. There's a certain nose that a criminal has. There's a certain height of a criminal. There's all of these integers, which we know are bullshit today, that classify a criminal. And I mean, it just so happened that most of these criminals were darker. And and like it's things like that within the canon of photography, I'm trying to be mindful of and approach in new ways. also there is that personal aspect of me in photography, which maybe comes from like me playing sports as a youth and whatnot, which is like, all right, if I'm going to compete, I want to be in the canon. I want to be, because like photography is one of those things that it is a trade. Like people forget it's a trade.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be the best at a trade. You can be the best at like these kinds of things. So the photographers that I really resonate with, these are people who I think have mastered imaging. You give them a printer or a camera, they can make you an image.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful. Now, there's also the scientific, the anthropological, the ethnographic, and also the philosophical and ontological. And this speaks to like the point about mythology, which is what is the Iliad but the hopes and dreams of the Greek people condensed into a work by Homer. Yeah. What is like, various stories. I mean, Les Miserables, Count of Monte Cristo, like any myth that the myth of the Anansi, like any myth that you can think of. These are the hopes and dreams of the people condensed into a volume of work. And something that an ex of mine used to call me all the time, which I used to take great offense to until I started embracing it. She used to always call me the Black Odysseus. And because like with no money, no actual knowledge, no wherewithal, I was able to take myself across all of these continents, embed myself into other societies, and photograph them and be around them, live their cultures, live their customs. And like for me, as someone from the hood, I was just talking to my homies in Van Dyke Peas yesterday about this. Like, these cats now who, when I left, they were 11, 12 years old. I'm back now at 33. They're now adult men. And they're like, oh, like people talk about you around here like you're a myth. Like you never existed, like we can't believe this, Right. And I told them like, I can't believe it either. Like there are times that I look into my archive and I'm like, yeah, I actually can't believe I made this image,
It's funny. Like that's one of the things, like when I look back through and I was, telling you about like how many of these interviews that I've been able to get and document and all of that. And, having one of these moments recently of seeing like this sort of shift. And, I'm a baseball guy too, so I definitely will mention that. I used to work for the Orioles back in the day in the event staff and all of that, and seeing like the new City Connect jerseys and seeing this sort of awareness around art, and me doing this podcast for the last few years. I don't know if they're connected, but then seeing, sort of the jersey, it having this reference to a poet that I interviewed a couple years ago, and it's literally a quote from a poem that he wrote. And then seeing, a musician I've interviewed twice do the national anthem, and then seeing they had the DJ set up, and I was like, oh, I've interviewed him. And then seeing the curator doing, and I'm like, oh, and no one knows who I am unless like you're really around.
But
and
meanwhile, you're at the nexus of these of all these.
And then even seeing sort of the traffic too, like, it's the using the hockey thing. It's the Wayne Gretzky of it. It's like, I'm going where the puck is going, not where it's already at.
That's right.
And I find like almost being a little bit ahead of it, having conversations with folks. And this one is definitely one of the stimulating conversations of, it doesn't feel like there's any like walls and blockades. It feels like, hey, this is the thought. This is the thinking. Where is it going? And, when I talk to folks about like, all right, this is what I have in mind. And then I start seeing it happening, where it's like, hey, I want to bridge these communities. This is my methodology. These are my ideas. Right. And I start seeing it, like whether it's people, because I do these interviews in Philly, I do these interviews in New York, do these interviews in New Orleans, and then seeing folks that I've interviewed come up into Baltimore and see it and then comment like, wow, I didn't know that was here. Or I didn't know this was in this community. This is like what Rob said. And just seeing that sort of connection. And it just tells me, it's like, I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing that right thing. And really being able to get into some of these spots where you hear someone that's an editor of a large magazine, well-respected magazine, or that has a really good profile. And I'm like, oh, I know about your work. I really respect and appreciate your work. That's a really good thing to hear. And it doesn't, make me say, okay, now I'm good. It makes me want to just keep going and look back at that archive like, damn, I did ask that. Damn, I am good at that.
Because at the end of the day, like it becomes a method of self-actualization, and becomes a method of like, all right, I'm doing this, so there's no reason why I should half-ass it. If I love it, I should continue to do it, and I should do it at the highest level, whatever that highest level is going to be. I should try and do it.
It's the Gambate thing. It's the Gambate thing where, it's just like, they don't say good luck, and using the Japanese idea. They don't say good luck. It's just like, you're going to put forth the best effort.
Exactly.
It's just, you're going to do it. You're just going to do it. And, as I try to extend and branch out on the things that I'm interested in and let, my interests kind of drive me, I get very protective of it, because people will do this thing, maybe it's what one looks like, maybe it's what one's background is, or whatever profile they fit, based on what they might look like. It's like, oh, I don't know if that has a lot of merit. It's like, well, I do. And that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
So I got two real questions before I hit two of these rapid fire questions, because I added one that's very trolly for a New Yorker, by the way. So let's talk about impact and exhibitions a bit. So showcasing internationally, can you talk about like those experiences in addition to, Schoenberg, in addition to Langston Hughes Library? Talk about sort of like the exhibition and engagements contributing to the artistic journey for you.
Totally. So internationally, and I'll preface this with saying, like, for a long time, well, not a long time, about 7 years or so, I stayed away from any interaction with gallery people, not that they were looking for, I made it a pointed effort to not promote or show my art to anyone who was involved in the art industry, because it was an industry I didn't understand. I understand drug dealing. I don't understand art. I don't understand the art industry.
That's a great quote. I'm going to use that quote. That's a great quote.
And I didn't understand the industry. And I mean, imagine being 24, 25, 26. I mean, I lived there for 4 years, in China, which has its own galleries, has its own art spaces. And, there are people who knew of the work. They're seeing the work, because I was a part of this collective called Basement 6, who actually gave my first exhibition, which I'll get to in a second. People are seeing the work and they're asking me like, yo, so what are you doing with it? This and the third. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know any of that shit works. So I don't want to be involved. I'd rather just like sit in the crib, smoke weed, make my pictures, hang out with my girl, rinse and repeat. like for me, it was just like, I'm just happy to be here making the pictures.
Right.
Like, if I die one day and like some fucking kid just finds this archive of shit, well, that's awesome. I'll be like Vivian Meyer or something. That's great. But Basement 6, when I met them, whom I met through the music scene, because very early on, people in the music scene in Shanghai, they noticed my photographs and noticed what I was doing, and they were like, hey, you should come and like photograph these shows, photograph these events. And it really helped break the ice for me in terms of like making the practice valuable enough for myself to do it in the street, to do it exclusively in the street, and the street and in the homes of people. But Basement 6, which was this like collective of just like artists and fucking wayward souls and LGBTQ people who are dodging Chinese censors, all this shit. They embraced me very early on, and they made me a part of the collective. And like from there, I was like, wow, like this is an artistic home where it's not pretentious. Everyone is just like creating. Everyone is, helping each other realize ideas. And these are people who were able to, take me around the city, like really take me around the city and make me a part of the city and make me understand how the city thinks, breathes, and acts.
Yeah.
And they made my work what probably would have taken me double the time that I spent in China. They made it possible for it to only take 4 years, you know.
Right.
And you know, they gave me my first exhibition, which was just like a group show, you know. But again, from there, like, you know, at the time I had never used medium format, which I upgraded to for this show. Broke the camera midway through preparing for it. Showed them the images, like, oh, these are great. These are amazing. You know, like, put these up. And everyone fucked with it, you know. And that put the battery in my back to like keep doing what I was doing, you know. And even moving ahead, you know, when I had left China, you know, I spent about a year or so just making more work and everything. And then I got to Brussels. I mean, I'm always making work, but I had spent like a year or so, like just making work alone. You know, I had moved to Morocco and I lived there for 5 months and by myself and just like shot a whole new project there. Then moved to Sardinia, Italy, which is where my ex is from, and lived among her people. Made the project that I was telling you about with the refugee and asylum seekers. Made a project in her village, which is a village of 4,000 people. And I had just, you know, kept making the work. And then I got to Brussels and you know, we were now really back in the Western world. Mm. And with that, there was a new set of challenges that I was not prepared for because I had basically left the West when I was like 22, 23 years old. Yeah. And now I'm 28, 29, like not back in America, but in a country I've never been in where people just speak French and Dutch, you know. It was a whole thing. And I'm like, well, shit, like now I have to put myself out. Now I have to be out there because, you know, I have my lady, got school, got all these things. Like we can no longer have the luxury of not being visible. Mm-hmm. We have to be visible. Yeah. And from there, that's when I started doing a lot of my public facing like installation works, which have all been like video works, usually like not documented, where I like live VJ basically with archive video. Nice. And I started to do those works. And you know, while it didn't manifest into any like into anything monetarily, it did manifest itself in terms of opportunities when I returned to the US, in the sense that, you know, I got back to America just months before the pandemic started. Mm. And in that time, and this answers your question about the Schomburg, in that time, I got together with Black Mass Publishing, which is run by a esteemed brother, Yusuf Hassan. And he commissioned me to make a book, or a zine, if you will, which was called The Lower Depths. And The Lower Depths was a 16-page book that consisted of a lot of my just like extremely short annotated like notes of my time away. You know, it was meant to represent the lower depths of my mind. So in it, there were photographs. There was a what I call a digital poem that I made. Yeah, do you think there was a speech from Mao Zedong where he implored Black people to move to China, and allegedly the speech was done while W.E.B. Du Bois was standing right next to him. And there were archive images from the Belgian raising of the Congo. And you know, the Schomburg, the Langston Hughes Library, and the Evergreen State College Library, they had interest in the books. in the book. They purchased it. And for me, as a native son of Harlem, having the Schomburg purchase one of my works was like, what? Like, I can't believe this, like it's incredible. So, you know, to even like further the exhibition, what like your question about the exhibitions, my first exhibition in the US was with Swivel Gallery, which was formerly based in Best Eye, Brooklyn. Now it's in Bushwick. And that exhibition was titled "A Lot of Things Have Changed, A Lot of Things Have Not," which is a direct quote from Mos Def at the beginning of his album Black on Both Sides. And for this exhibition, which was meant to be a survey, which was meant to exist as a survey of my withdrawal and return. One of the centerpieces for that exhibition that I created was a vitrine, kind of like a display box of sorts that housed the multiple phones that I used while I was overseas, my camera that I used for most of the time that I was overseas, letters that were written to me by former loves, or death certificates, all kinds of just more archival information. And I was very inspired to make this vitrine by the work of Joseph Beuys, who Joseph Beuys was a former Nazi soldier who allegedly crash landed amongst some shaman, had a significant change of heart, and crash landed among some natives who then introduced him to a shaman who then changed his life allegedly. And from that point on, he began to make art, which always had this idea of social practice in it. So it was like, okay, not only social practice, but mythology, mythology, personal and external mythologies. And one of the things that he would do is he would build these vitrines that would house like objects. It could be leather from a boot. It could be fur, whatever, And he did this to push forward the idea that these objects that we interface with, they are not only ready-mades, to speak to Marcel Duchamp, but they are also these objects that have intense resonance with us spiritually, physically, and metaphorically. And they are as worthy of display as the art pieces we make. And for me, I try to take that a step further with offering aspects of my life that were very near and dear to me, such as like putting my grandmother's death certificate in the vitrine, but heavily redacting the information, and which is something that I do in my text practice to protect the lives of people, and so on and so forth. Also, a kind of critique of the United States' own process of redacting information, but in this, I was very happy that people understood the point, that people understood that, I had left the US as one person and I returned as a new person, and while not much had changed in the way that I go about my life, much had changed in the way that I thought about life. And, really, this exhibition was meant to signify that, like, all right, I am in a medium that everyone thinks that they do today because it's so ubiquitous. But what I am doing is not just making pictures. I am writing a novel. I am maybe multiple novels, maybe, I'm really trying to offer something to the people that I hope will exist in a way that people will be able to analyze and, critique for years to come. And all of these exhibitions and spaces that I've been able to get to work in, they have served as kind of like, I've used this word a lot, but like flashpoints to describe my own personal development, and also to hammer home this singular idea that for me, the only thing that's relevant today is how we translate culture to one another. It's how we not only translate culture, but how we present culture to one another. And I believe that we live in such a globalized world that I would hope that we are beyond just the monolithic displays of culture. And, I really want to create an archive that really pushes that idea forward. And I like to believe that my exhibitions have done this, have really worked to create threads between cultures and between these seemingly disparate spaces that we're in. Because again, like Shanghai, China, Morocco, Italy, Belgium, America, like these are all places that maybe politically they have some sort of like tethering to one another, but socially, we live in the age of globalization, but we're so disconnected socially from all of these places. And for me, like the exhibition, at least in the context of my work, should serve as that hub or nexus for giving people this sort of experience.
Thank you. Wow. I mean, you got, again, you start off, right, the podcast with like answering like 4 of my questions, and then you wrap the podcast with answering, because there was one that I skipped and I was like, nah, he got it. so thank you. No, this is great. Like I said, you make my job easier, and I think there's a lot to kind of like break through, and I see a lot of sort of it's not simpatico is not the word, but I see a lot of similarities in how you're approaching and what you've been mentioning in the through line that you've been discussing in this interview with what I aspire to do, and it makes me kind of think about what I'm doing in a slightly different way. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing so much.
Happy to feel that way.
So I want to hit you with these rapid fire questions.
Please do.
I got the trolley one I got to ask you.
Hey, I love trolling, so please ask me.
All right. So don't overthink these questions. We all do it. Yankees or Mets?
Mets.
My man. Hell yeah.
Come on now.
Oh man. He's got to make sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like, many places and, the sort of Odysseus Odyssey situation. What's the favorite place you've lived at?
Oh shit. Fuck. Favorite place I lived in. For sheer freedom, this is gonna sound crazy. Shanghai, for sure. But Shanghai is different today. I would don't anyone listening, don't go. I mean, go, but like don't go with what I'm about. Don't go with what I'm about to say in mind. When I was there, that shit was like Paris in the 20s, But it was just like all the little freedoms we don't have in America, you have there. Just don't say anything about the government. But failed at that too. But
you don't want to get Ai Weiwei,
That's right. But in terms of like, I think in my soul, what was my favorite place to live? Just in terms of like what was needed, what was given to me, what I learned, how it evolved me. Living in Orgozolo, Sardinia. Orgozolo, Sardinia is a town of 4,000 people in the mountains of Sardinia, Italy. And my ex is from there. And, I lived there with her and her family, who immediately basically brought me on as family. The whole village embraced me. And I got to make, well, not the whole village embraced me, but enough people in the village embraced me. I got to make work that at the time I didn't know that besides myself, Sebastiana Sata, and 1 or 2 other also Italian photographers, the only other photographer to make work in this village was Henry Cartier-Bresson. So like, for me, I was like, well, shit, like, I'm walking the same track as legends in a place that I'm completely just living and chilling. Like I'm drinking spritz every day. I'm chilling, like hard chilling. And I mean, also Sardinia is so small, it's so beautiful. I mean, it looks like the goddamn like Garden of Eden or something. I mean, it's incredible, you know. I'm just a city boy, so I couldn't stay there for long. But again, I would say that was probably my favorite place that I've lived in. And then like following that, Marrakesh, for sure.
So let's see. This one's going to be interesting. And it kind of falls in line with, so what we've been talking through.
I'm ready.
What would the, autobiography title be? Give me the title.
It'd be Joseph Cochran II. At least he tried.
I like it. I like it.
I mean, I have something more explicit, but that might have to be off air.
This is the last run, and it falls into the trolling because I told you about, my partner's a New Yorker, and we go back and forth. I always hear about water and bagels and all of the nonsense. In those travels, what is the sort of New York staple food that you miss the most?
Oh shit, definitely a hero. Definitely a hero sandwich. I mean, like, god damn. Even when I found, I remember arguing with my ex about like paninis, which are very different in Italy. Very different in Italy, paninis. Very, very different. I want to make that clear for everyone. But I sit here like, yo, where's your delis at? She's just like, delis? We have a panini shop. And I'm like, a panini shop? The fuck is that? Go to get a panini. I'm like, oh, this thin ass, weird ass bread. Like, I want my probably cancerous, fat, filled with food hero. And I want globs of fucking garlic mayo on it. I want fries on the side. I need that. I want that. It's in my heart. It's great. That and definitely halal food for sure. Which I was happy that I met the Uyghur population in China because I don't eat pork, and like in China, like you eat a shit ton of pork if you eat pork. Yeah. And it was cool that like I just lived down the block from like a bunch of just like Muslim people who, for very cheap, even by China's standards, I could eat like very clean and very healthy. Yep. It was very good. But yeah, like the hero for sure, man. I mean, I'm about to get a fucking hero right now, right? I have to go to the gym.
Yeah, I'm a beginning of the morning kind of guy and just banging weights, what have you. And that first thing I was like, yo, I need like an egg and cheese. I need something
fire
on the English.
See, I was making that in the crib. I was just like in the crib, like just making them sausage, egg, and cheeses and all that. So like a lot of my New York staples, I would just make at home. So like even like the bagels and stuff, like I made my little lox bagel and all that. Like I was doing my thing, but yeah, like, and also one of the things I definitely missed, and this is more so a China specific one, was American Chinese food, and this probably speaks to how hood I am. Yeah. I remember very early on going to like restaurants with my homies. And I'm like, yo, like, where's the General Tso chicken? Like where's the shrimp fried rice? They're like, what? Like, what are you talking about? They're like, oh no, you mean the Cantonese food? Like we don't eat that here. I'm like, oh shit,
something else.
yeah. So definitely Chinese takeout. Miss that. Shout out to all my Chinese takeouts all over the world. Y'all much appreciated.
That's a great way to end that. Thank you, man. This has been great. This has been robust. I mean, I appreciate it, and and what I want to do is in these final moments offer the space for you to let the fine folks know where to check you out, check out your work, social media, website, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
My website is josephcochran.net. Probably the easiest way to find me is on Instagram. My Instagram is Joey Jr., or to be specific, at 2_ Joey Jr. And also subscribe to my Substack, joeyjr.substack. Everything can be found on links on my Instagram. And other than that, shout out to my family at Uncensored New York, and shout out to you, Rob.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Joseph Cochran II for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art and culture in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.